Every once in a while you encounter a high-end audio product that's so different from what you've heard before that it really changes your perspective on what's possible. I've had a few such encounters like that during my reviewing career, and today's product is one of them, the Bowers and Wilkins 705 S3 stand mount speaker. I'm Aaron Jenkins, and here on the Absolute Sounds YouTube channel I review entry-level high-end products, as well as products that might appeal to those listeners with real-world, often shared rooms. At $3,600 a pair, plus $820 for the matching stands that you're really going to want, the B&W 705 S3s aren't what most people would consider entry-level, but they were definitely excellent performers in my real-world listening space. The 705 S3s are part of B&W's 700 series, which includes 3 floor standers, 2 other stand mounts, and 2 center channels. The company touts the trickle-down benefits from its more expensive 800 Diamond series, including what it calls the solid-body tweeter-on-top enclosure. This milled tapered aluminum tube houses the 705 S3's 1-inch carbon fiber tweeter. As the name suggests, the 800 series Diamond models have diamond tweeters, but a similar tweeter-on-top arrangement. While the enclosure itself is solid, aside from a tiny rear port, its connection to the woofer enclosure isn't. There's a flexible decoupling material between the two, which prevents the woofer's vibrations from affecting the tweeter. B&W says the tweeter's breakup threshold is 47,000 Hz, which is far above the range of human hearing, although the speaker's plus or minus 3 decibel frequency range tops out at only 28,000 Hz. The bottom end of that plus 3 minus decibel range is 50 Hz, and it's delivered by the B&W's proprietary 6.5-inch continuum mid-bass driver, which is mounted in a circular ring that protrudes slightly from the gently rounded front of the fairly small rear-ported box. All told, the 705 S3 is about 16 inches tall, about 7.5 inches wide, and a little under a foot deep. But it looks shorter since the woofer closure itself is less than a foot tall. Each speaker weighs 21 pounds, and B&W rates the 705 S3's nominal impedance as 8 ohms, but notes that it can fall as low as 3.7 ohms. Its sensitivity is 88 decibels at 2.83 volts at 1 meter. Aside from the tweeter tube, the first thing I noticed about the B&Ws was their finish quality. The gloss black lacquer was, to my eyes, basically flawless. Mocha and satin white finishes are also available, and the dual binding posts on the back of the speaker are polished like jewels. The handsome stands have a similarly flawless finish, and when attached to the speakers they form almost an architectural object. When Tom Martin reviewed B&W's $15,000 804D4 floor standard in April, he described an elevated upper mid-range and treble delivery, which gave, on recordings with very high clean frequencies, a sense of clarity and openness and snap that's rather special. And this distinctive voicing carries over, or trickles down, to the 705 S3, and was the first thing I and everyone else who listened to the speakers noticed. Distilling everyone else's comments, you basically get, "Oh my god, it's so clear." The highs did occasionally sound a little bright, as Tom noted in his review of the 804D4, but never offensively so, and certainly never in a tiring or fatiguing way. The 705 S3's clarity, which extends throughout the entire frequency range, occasionally revealed details I had never heard before on recordings, and certainly made listening to old favorites feel like a new experience. The speakers revealed everything that was in the recording, but again, not in an uncomfortable way. They never sounded anything less than smooth, calm, and musical. This clarity was accompanied by a sense of airiness, as well as a clear recreation of the space where the music was recorded, rather than the space I was actually sitting in. Imaging was also extremely impressive, with singers and instruments arranged with laser-like precision across a wide and tall sound space. The actual sound stage was only as wide as the speakers were apart, although it always seemed wider whenever I got caught up in the music. In addition, some recordings also delivered a remarkably three-dimensional presentation. And all of these factors contributed to a sense of realism and a better glimpse of the absolute sound than I've heard in my space before, and in some cases better than I would have guessed was possible in a real-world room. Moving back to voicing, the 705S3's mid-range and mid-bass were clear, detailed, smooth, full, and fundamentally neutral in tone, but otherwise defined, more so than with any other speaker I've reviewed, by the associated integrated amplifier and DAC I was using, to the point that they essentially sounded like different speakers depending on how they were being driven. With the Rogue Audio Cronus Dark tube amp, the mids were dark and sensual, dense with tonal color and richness. With the NAD C 389, the mid-range was neutral and taut. With the AVM 30.3, the mid-range is offered more tone, color density, resolution, and ease than the NAD, but more drive and tonal neutrality than the Rogue. And the name CI Unity 102's mid-range was crisp, powerful, and very musically engaging. As I mentioned earlier, the 705S3s produce a lot of bass for their size, too much sometimes for my relatively small space without some form of correction. Otherwise, the bass was clean, clear, and detailed, as well as effortlessly reproduced. Bass impact was punchy and full down to around 50 Hz. And while I was happy with the B&W's bass performance on their own, I did spend some time experimenting with a subwoofer, in this case the Golden Ear Super Sub X. Setting the sub's internal low pass crossover to 50 Hz and its output level at its lowest indicated point, essentially 1 out of 10, the Golden Ear added a solid low frequency foundation to the 705S3s without muddying things up at all. A few things to note. The 705S3s reward good positioning, and while they don't sound bad at all when placed in a reasonable location, that last quarter-inch adjustment can really make the imaging snap into focus and the speakers themselves disappear as a sound source. In addition to getting the distances from the front wall, each other, and the listening position correct, and the speakers angled just right, mine ended up towed in around 10 to 15 degrees. You'll also want to make sure that the rest of your system is of similarly high quality. In my case, when I swapped out my reference AudioQuest Rocket 33 speaker cables for the company's Rocket 88s, it transformed the 705S3 sound, giving me much more detail and clarity, along with far more information about the sonic qualities of the upstream equipment. Then, switching to the slightly more expensive Rocket 88 single bi-wire cables, which feature a single set of connectors at the amplifier end and 2 pairs at the speaker end, that further improved the B&W's clarity and especially their ease. In some ways, spending $1,200 to $1,300 on a speaker cable sounds like a lot to pay to use with a $3,600 speaker, but having heard the difference that the Rocket 88s make, I wouldn't hesitate to spend the extra money if it was in my budget. As you can probably tell, I absolutely love the B&W 705S3s, which brought me closer to finding the absolute sound in my room than any other speaker I've reviewed. From their astonishing clarity and detail to their large sound space and pinpoint imaging to their mighty for the size bass output, I think these are just fantastic speakers. They deliver a significant step up in terms of musical realism from the $1,000 to $2,000 speakers I've reviewed in the past, which is exactly what you would want for their 50% or more higher price tag. And in addition, their fit and finish are superb. They just exude quality. I don't think everyone will like their sound though, thanks to that elevated upper mid-range and treble performance. Some people will think it's too bright, and it might really be too bright if that's an attribute of your amplifier, and they will also quickly reveal any shortcomings elsewhere in your system. Otherwise though, if they fit in your budget, I can't think of a single reason not to audition the 705S3s.